because the best way to save the planet is to let it be, is to reduce our footprint without reducing ourselves. Yeah, I just made that up. I like that. I'll still go in the book.
Reduce our footprint without
reducing ourselves. And so we are a nuclear planet, and it is non-productive to be afraid of the very material that allows us to exist.
Yeah.
So we have to go beyond combustion, not back away from combustion.
Just because the facts are A, if the narrative is B and everyone believes the narrative, then B is what matters. But it's our job in our industry to speak up proudly, soberly, and to engage people in this dialogue. Those 2.5 billion people that are in energy poverty, they need us.
America cannot meet this threat alone.
If there is a single country,
of course, the world cannot meet it without America,
that is willing to
but we're going to need you, the next generation, to finish the job.
Nuclear regulation.
We need scientists to design new fuels.
And focus on net public benefit.
We need engineers to invent new technologies.
Over absurd levels of radiation protection.
Entrepreneurs to sell those technologies.
Then we will march towards this.
We need workers to operate assembly lines that hum with high-tech, zero-carbon components.
Unlimited prosperity for all humans.
We need diplomats and businessmen and women and Peace Corps volunteers to help developing nations skip past the dirty phase of development and transition to sustainable sources of energy. In other words, we need you.
Okay, welcome to another episode of the Fire to Fission podcast. I'm Mark Hinaman, and I'm joined by a writer today, Mike Conley. Lives in LA. Was very adamant about being introduced as a writer and not a scientist. So, Mike, how you doing today?
I'm doing fine. Doing good. Finally, we have a sunny day after 6 solid weeks of cloudy weather, preceded by 2 solid weeks of rain.
June gloom.
It's more than June gloom. It's May and June gloom. It's like April, May, June gloom.
Right? Yeah.
Yeah, and it's just like sunny Southern California. So, yet another example of why we shouldn't depend on the weather for our energy.
Absolutely. Mike and I were bantering a little bit before we hopped on or started recording. And so really stoked to dive into the conversation, learn more about his work. Mike, before we get on to kind of some of your current projects, why don't you give us a little bit of background on how long you've been writing, what you kind of write about? Yeah. Where'd you get your start?
Oh, gosh. I mean, I've been writing since I was a teenager, and I got into screenwriting early on and wrote a bunch of stuff, and one got sold and it never got made. And we're still not quite sure why. I haven't been rewritten by Quentin Tarantino, which was kind of a nice pat on the back, except he was so mad with the director's comments that we were told by the producer that he destroyed the screenplay. And we're like, you get rewritten by Tarantino and you can't even read the damn thing. Anyway, got paid a lot to do a lot of rewriting. A lot in Hollywood, a lot of stuff gets written that never gets made. People spend their whole careers writing and they never get made. So things might change. I am connected with a project that looks like it's going to get funded. And when it does, I will let you know. It's kind of bad luck to talk about things now, but serious, big time, no BS, full tilt boogie, features, all that good stuff. Yeah, it looks very, very good. So let's just put it that way. I'll tell you, you can pester me about it later, and when it comes to fruition, then I can give away the secret. But
yeah, you can reference.
I'm not making it up. I mean, it's actual, like a no BS, oh my God, this is going to be a major motion picture kind of a thing. So we'll just leave it at that. So not making it up.
Did you use, I mean, you mentioned you write nonfiction now, but you used to write fiction.
Yeah. Well, about a dozen years ago, I was cruising around the internet late at night, and I got returned on to nuclear power, which I was fascinated by when I was in grade school. And I started looking into it and reading up about thorium and molten salt reactors in particular. And so I joined the Thorium Energy Alliance, which is a bunch of nuclear advocates, fanboys, scientists, and outsiders that have been championing. I can write that better than I can say it. Molten salt reactors and thorium as fuel, et cetera, et cetera. It led to the last 12 years. I basically told these guys, I go, look, I'm a writer, y'all are scientists. You explain it to me and I'll explain it to the world. And they're like, wow, who are you? What are you? Yeah, what do you give credits? And so I just started listening and I started writing, and lo and behold, they liked what I write. And so Eric called me about 2 years ago, year and a half ago, and he said, he read an earlier draft of my book, which is now called Earth is a Nuclear Planet. And he said, to be honest, it's the best book I've ever read on the subject, or
That's
words to
great.
that effect. And I'm like, well, that's cool. And then he got himself a benefactor and funded me so I can sit at home in my pajamas and write. And the book is that far from being on the market, and it's a humdinger. So,
Awesome.
yeah.
And that's Eric
Eric
Meyer with
Meyer of
Generation
Generation
Atomic.
Atomic, who's done
Yeah.
amazing work going around the world with his people, his elves, I call them, and protesting and generating interest in nuclear power. And I tailored the book to be not only a general education for the non-scientist, but also as a promotional, marketing, educational piece for his group and outreach sort of a thing. Like, here, Earth is a
Nice.
nuclear planet. Read this and find out why.
Yeah. I know Eric Meyer personally, but I don't think we've had a mention of Generation Atomic on the show yet. So do you want
Oh,
to give kind of a just
yeah,
brief background
yeah.
of
You
who
got to
they
go
are
to
and what they do? And
generationatomic.org. They're a nuclear advocacy and outreach group. And he's amazing.
yeah,
I can't remember. He has a master's in, I think, political organization or some sort of the kind of education you would get if you were to, for example, become a member of like the Minnesota State Democratic Party or whatever. And he just decided to take all his talent and put it into nuclear power, which
right.
is, awesome. So he has that understanding, that organizational skills and outreach and getting attention and how to talk to and how to reach out to politicians, et cetera. And I told him that one of my goals is to get a copy of our book in the energy advisor of everybody on the Hill, everybody. And hopefully we can pull that off. So, yeah, so I've just been working with these scientists for years now, listening and absorbing and being part of the team, being part of the group. And what I bring to the table is the ability to take their highfalutin stuff and explain it to regular people. And apparently it works because people read it and they dig it. So we're off to a good start. So,
That's helpful.
Yeah.
When you dove back into the subject, what turned you on about it most?
Well, I'll tell you, in the late 90s, I was reading up on peak oil, and it became there's that big article, Scientific American, The End of Cheap Oil, 1998. It was like this turning point article. And
That was kind of predictive. Yeah.
I'm sorry?
It said that was kind of predictive. Yeah. It got
It was,
cheaper. It
well,
went
that's the
negative
thing. The thing
at one point.
is the graph is the graph. There's a finite amount of oil and you use it to a certain degree or whatever, and you can change the graph a bit by introducing shale oil, so it goes more into the future. I guess the future would be this way for the camera audience, but it's still the same graph. And so this whole thing about, we have shale oil now or shale gas or what the hell ever and everything's fine, is like, yeah, everything's fine for the next like 7 years, and so it can delay or put off that eventuality, but it is still an eventuality. And so I wish I could turn that off, but I can tell you all about reactors, but when it comes to phones, forget it. So I actually got very depressed, like existential depression, I guess you could call it, for a number of years. It's kind of like the game's over. Like all this stuff, all this plastic. I mean, this is plastic,
Yeah.
that's oil.
Yeah.
This is oil.
Glass frames. Yeah.
Yeah, my plastic glasses, right? Exactly. And it's kind of like oil is so all encompassing. It has everything to do with modern society, and it's our energy, and there's only a finite amount, and holy shit, what the hell is going to happen? And then I stumbled onto the latest work on nuclear power, and it was like this ray of hope. And the thing I stumbled on was the molten salt reactors, which are just ingeniously designed. They're stupid simple. I mean, they're so stupid simple. It's embarrassingly ridiculous how simple they are. The guy that invented them or co-invented them is the same guy that invented the light water reactor. It's kind of like his reactor 2.0. And I was supremely impressed. And it basically restored my hope in the ability to have civilization continue largely as it has been.
That's cool.
Yeah,
That's
yeah, it's way cool.
awesome.
And
Yeah.
so I got involved in these people and I started listening and learning. And then I started writing essays and eventually decided one thing I realized is like, these guys need a writer. I spent like 9 hours one day on the internet trying to learn what the hell a fast reactor was. And when I finally figured it out, I'm like, well, shit, they could have done that in one paragraph. I'm like, these guys need a writer. And I kind of went, hey, I can write. And so it kind of led to that. And so I've been the non-scientist guy amongst these guys going, tell me about it and I'll explain it to everybody else. And they're like, okay, you know, all this highfalutin stuff. And I boil it down. And well, now my best friend is a molten salt chemist and reactor designer. We're like this. And we're going to team up, and Stephen Boyd, and we're going to team up and write my fourth book, which is going to be called Power to the Planet, which is a super deep geek dive into all things nuclear and seawater uranium and Purex and how come reactors work the way they do. And it's just kind of like a big kind of a nuts and bolts sort of extravaganza. But that's the fourth book.
That's great.
I'm still trying to get the first one out. But I have 2 others written. And so I will have 3 books out this year. Earth is a nuclear planet. The L&T report, which is about the linear no threshold, which we can discuss. Basically, the concept behind linear no threshold is the lie that there is no safe dose of radiation. It's basically bad science, which we abbreviate as BS. And the third book is Roadmap to Nowhere, which is, you're familiar, of course, with Mark Jacobson's stuff about 100% renewables.
But why don't you give the audience a background in case?
Okay, Mark Jacobson is a professor.
Familiar with it, but yeah.
Yeah, he's a professor at Stanford, and he's come up with this big proposal for 100% renewable energy to power the entire United States, all primary energy. Primary energy is any form of energy at all, not just electricity, like all energy, wind and solar. His program is 98.8% wind and solar. So it's basically a wind and solar, 100% wind and solar grid, no gas, no coal, no oil, and especially no nuclear, because that's the work of the devil. And so it's become very
10 times more hydro than we currently have or really have capacity for. He doesn't.
Well, the thing about hydro, is we don't have much capacity for it. For example, in his grid that he prophesied for the mid-century, it's 1,179 gigawatts. We have 89 gigawatts of hydro in this country if the reservoirs are full. Have you seen Hoover Dam lately?
I thought it filled back up this year. I don't know. Is it? We're getting more
like
rain.
this much. Yeah, But so me and my co-writer, Tim Maloney, who's like a scientist, geek, number cruncher guy, I give all the number stuff to him. I'm the writer. He's the number cruncher. It works great. We looked at Jacobson's plan and we looked at it and we read the whole thing 4 times and we're like, this is bullshit. The more you read it, the flimsier it is. And so we're like, well, screw this guy. We're going to design a 100% nuclear grid as a rebuttal. And we use his numbers to show that his plan is BS. That's what Roadmap to Nowhere, my third book, is. Here's his theoretical 100% wind and solar grid. And we're like, well, screw you. Here's a theoretical 100% nuclear grid. Let's do a road test. And nuclear just mops the floor with his idea. And again, we use his numbers.
Yeah. Like his energy inputs or his...
Yeah, like how many turbines, how big are they, where are they, how many solar panels, how long do they last, how long does the electrolyzers last for the hydrogen production, how big is his hydrogen storage? And he has all these numbers in his paper, so we're just adding it all up, and we're like, I can give you really quickly 10.6 billion solar panels. That's billion with a B.
Yeah.
394,000 5-gigawatt wind turbines, all of which will have to be replaced or repowered in about 20, 30 years.
Sounds like a great
on
strategy if you're a utility executive that gets compensated for capital deployment. But
what was that again? I'm sorry.
I said it sounds like a great strategy if you're a utility executive that gets compensated for capital deployment, right? So,
Exactly. Exactly. They're getting compensated for capital deployment. You can put 100 gigs in the field, installed capacity versus average capacity. And
right.
the wind and solar companies are all touting installed capacity because the numbers look great on paper. But most people don't do the math. It's really arithmetic. It's not even math. Is that the average capacity is like, 20 to 40%. So add another 3 or 4 times, and then storage. He has all these batteries in his plan. He has no operation and maintenance for the batteries. And this is an actual quote from his proposal is assume perfect transmission, end quote. So we have a chapter called assuming the transmission.
And why that doesn't work?
And why that doesn't work is
Does
because,
that include building the transmission?
well, he assumes that the transmission will magically be there.
Oh,
And
man.
we're assuming
That's like the worst assumption on the planet.
well, here's the thing is he's in this wind and solar is groovy world. So he's in this world where everybody's coming up with wind and solar plans. And so the unwritten assumption is that the transmission will be there because it has to be there. The point about a nuclear grid is you don't need any extra transmission. As a matter of fact, you can reduce your transmission corridors because with local power, you don't have to ship it anywhere. So why have a reactor at El Segundo and ship the power in through acreage that's $1 million a square an acre through down Los Angeles to downtown when you can have a reactor downtown and then dismantle that transmission line and develop the real estate or turn it into a park or whatever. And so the point about a nuclear grid is you would actually have a reduced footprint, although upgraded within that footprint, but a reduced footprint. And then, of course, the footprint for nuclear versus wind and solar is, if there's a word that's more descriptive than minuscule, I'll start using it. But the scale is ridiculous. He actually has come up with 47,000 square miles of land, 3,000 square miles of rooftop, and 46,000 square miles of offshore. Now, he doesn't say these numbers, but you can divine it from his happy charts in his program. So we basically just dug in there and penciled it all out, and we're like, this is bad. So
Mike, I mean, there's a lot that you mentioned here, and I want to unpack some of it, but two key
sure.
points.
No, yeah, you have to rein me in. Go right ahead.
No, all good. All right.
Okay.
Yeah. I agree totally. This is first point, like the transmission assumption is a bad assumption, but it is one that a lot of society and everyone that touts renewables makes, is that building these transmission lines will be easy and virtually free, which is radically false.
That's right.
Building cross-country projects and getting permission from landowners at the private, state, and federal level is really, really hard.
Yeah.
In
Iowa, in the state of Iowa now, they made it so it's against the state constitution to use eminent domain to plow a right-of-way for a transmission line.
Yeah, that's a big deal, right?
It's a huge deal. And all that stuff about Maine, we're going to plow through your forest and run a bunch of wires to Massachusetts.
Yeah.
And then Maine is like, really? How's that help us? Here's the money for your pristine forest. Oh, thanks. I mean, it's nuts.
Every example across the U.S. of where people try and do this, it's hard.
Well, the thing is, Princeton has actually went through the due diligence to devise roadmaps for different grid scenarios. And the NZA, Net Zero America plan by Princeton, it came out, I think, in 21 or 22. Very good. Their estimate for a 100% wind and solar transmission system is about 4.2 or $3.7 trillion.
Wow.
So we tacked it on to the Jacobson's roadmap. That and battery O&M, operation and maintenance, is the only two numbers we imported into his plan.
Yeah.
But he basically said we assume perfect transmission. And I'm like, well, that's a $3.2 trillion assumption. But it
Easy
is.
for an economist, right? I mean, assume a can opener.
It's ridiculous. And that's because he's in this world where it's kind of a foregone conclusion that we will go wind and solar, therefore it will be built, therefore it doesn't have to be in the proposal. And we're like, well, it has to be in your proposal, but not ours.
Yeah.
Give you an example. If you dismantle a dam to restore run of the river, that dam still has a transmission system connected to an existing corridor.
Still useful.
Dismantle the dam, put a reactor there, kick back and watch the river flow, and make clean energy 24/7, not when there's enough water, but 24/7.
That's what they want to do in the Pacific Northwest, right?
Yeah, exactly. There's all these dams they want to
The
dismantle.
Washington River. Yeah.
Yeah, they want to dismantle all these dams, but people forget is those dams have great transmission. What do they call it when you take the power from the? I should get a little more technical with this. You take the power from the dam and then you fiddle around with it so you can export it. That whole fiddling around station, I guess you call it the transmission station.
Right? Yeah.
I'm embarrassed that I don't know the term. I should.
All good. Interconnection or substation or yeah.
Thank you. And the corridor it is connected to is all valuable stuff. Put a reactor there.
Yep. I agree. That's a great idea. Call attention to about the Jacobson report, at least. I mean, there were some people that tried to do this, or, peer review his work, and then ended up he sued them for defamation. Are you guys worried about that?
Oh, yeah. We mentioned it in Roadmap to Nowhere that Christopher Clack and his buddies wrote up a devastating thing we call the Clack evaluation. I think it was in 2019, and it just skewered Jacobson's stuff, although it did it in such a highfalutin science paper manner that, I mean, you need a guide to get through it if you're not a PhD. I have PhDs that I can use for guides. And but long story short, Christopher Clack was sued by Jacobson for defamation, and Jacobson also sued PNAS Proceedings, which is the magazine of the National Academy of Sciences. Case was thrown out, and the judge said he had to pay back Clack's legal fees.
Yeah.
And so if he wants to sue me, go right ahead. I got a 20-year-old car. You can take that. I mean, like, knock yourself out, Jacobson. The point being is science should be settled in the laboratory and not a court of law.
I agree. Yeah. That's a great practice.
Yeah. Well, thank you.
Okay, so let's circle back to your first book.
Earth is a nuclear planet?
Yeah, Earth is a nuclear planet.
Earth is a nuclear planet.
What's the overview?
I'm sorry?
What's it about?
What's it about? Oh, just a bunch of nuclear stuff. No, it was originally called Fear of a Nuclear Planet. What we were addressing in the book, or what we address in the book, is the various fears that people have. Fukushima, Chernobyl, radiation, cancer, the expense of nuclear, how long it takes, what do you do with the waste? And then when we're writing it, we're like, we started getting into kind of a cool thing about how in an actual literal sense, life would not exist on this planet if we didn't have radioactive material in the core to keep the core molten. And so this planet is a nuclear planet. We wouldn't be here trying to clean up our own mess if it wasn't a nuclear planet, because it is the molten core that generates our magnetic shield, which keeps the solar winds from blowing away our atmosphere, which is what happened with Mars. Mars's core cooled, which they're just like confirming now. We kind of stuck our necks out about 3-4 years ago when we were writing it, like, I know they're going to figure this out. And sure enough, they did. But well, it's true. But so we have uranium and thorium and potassium-40 and rubidium-87 and all this nasty stuff in the core of our Earth. It keeps the outer core molten. It circulates. We have a magnetic shield. We have a breathable atmosphere. And here we are. So we are living on a nuclear planet, and our contention is that we should take this material and learn how to use it to live here cleanly. Because the best way to, like, save the planet is to let it be, is to reduce our footprint without reducing ourselves. Yeah, I just
Yeah.
made that up. I like that. I'll still go in the book.
Reduce our footprint without
Without reducing ourselves. And so we are a nuclear planet, and it is non-productive to be afraid of the very material that allows us to exist.
Yeah.
So we have to go beyond combustion, not back away from combustion. Jacobson and his pals and who's that knucklehead, the Rocky Mountain Institute?
You're, there's a
That
few.
guy.
Yeah, your words and mine.
That guy. Yeah, it's my word. Yeah, he can sue me. He thinks that Earth is a knucklehead planet. That if we have enough energy, oh my God, all the bad things we'll do with it. We need just enough to keep the lights on.
Oh yeah, Amory
Yeah.
Lovins, I think is
That guy. Yeah.
Yeah.
That guy.
Yeah.
Yeah. And so
Those can be my words too. Yeah, I support your viewpoint on that.
well, thank you. And so the thing is, he and Jacobson want to go back away from combustion to a pre-combustion state of harvesting natural energy and when and where it occurs and all this other crapola. And it's like, that's great if you have 500 million people. We have 8,
Yeah.
and we need
already
to go
past that.
beyond combustion and make fire obsolete.
Yeah.
That's our contention. And so all the stuff I've been blabbing about is all kind of like in the book. And what's the book about? It's about that.
I like it.
Yeah.
That's really cool. I bet that's going to be awesome to read.
It's a humdinger, I'm telling you. I mean, it's readable. I've written a lot of comedy. Comedy for me is easier to write than drama. And so the book, if you don't get a couple of belly laughs out of the book, you're not paying attention. There's some zingers in there. But basically, it was the idea of being an entertaining, informative, educational, all that good stuff. So I pretended I was writing a long letter to my sister. Hey, Sue, guess what I figured out? 500 pages. And so it is written in a coffee dinner table sort of conversational voice. Okay.
Excellent.
Because people, they don't want to like page I love Christopher Clack and what he did, but the average Joe is not going to read that, and they need to. So yeah. I made it readable. And nothing on Chris. I mean, what he did was invaluable, but that's what I do. I take all this highfalutin stuff and make it so my plumber can understand it.
So when should people expect it out?
Well, hopefully it'll be out in August. We're just doing the final edits now, and they're gearing up the whole publicity thing, which I guess this is a part of. Hi. And yeah, and then it'll be very quickly followed by its short companion book, the L&T Report, which is the subtitle of which is How the Linear No Threshold Model of Radiation Safety Made the World Afraid of Nuclear Power. And it tells the history of how the erroneous concept that there's no safe dose became entrenched in the human psyche and in regulations.
Wasn't it so bizarre that, I mean, it's literally like a boogeyman that we became so afraid, and I say the collective we became so afraid of something that is so not dangerous. Right?
Yes.
I mean, it's like being afraid of butterflies. Like, you get the butterflies around you, they can probably smother you and kill you, but
you never know about those damn butterflies.
6 months,
if the butterfly lands on the right neuron in the right lobe of your brain at the right time of day, you might come down with cancer.
It sounds ridiculous, but when you dig into the science, it really is that ridiculous.
It really is. I mean, just as one example, before the Russians invaded, when Chernobyl was just sitting there, you would get more radiation flying from, say, New York to Chernobyl to go on a tour than you would be spending 3 days at the plant. Now, of course, the Russians kicked up all the dust and it's not that good, but the dust is eventually going to settle again. And in the meantime, it's the largest natural wildlife habitat in Europe, and the mutation rate of the local floral and fauna is maybe this much more than some pristine island somewhere in the Pacific. It's entirely inconsequential. Entirely inconsequential. Another one I just figured out is somebody visited the Fukushima reactors, and they were standing next to the fuel pool, the used fuel pool, and they did a radiation count. And they go, oh, it's like 0.07 microsieverts per hour. And so I did the math, and I'm like, yeah, wow. If your office desk was next to that fuel pool and you worked 8 hours a day, you would get 140 millisieverts a year, which is less than if you lived at Guarapari Beach in Brazil. In 1956, the British Medical Research Society estimated that 140 millisieverts a year would be the limit beyond which you might have to start worrying about cancer.
Why did they estimate it at that?
I'm not sure exactly why. I'd have to read it all again, but that was their conclusion. I think it's in paragraph 52 or 54 of their 1956 report. But it was not sure exactly how they phrased it.
It seems reasonable that you would set the dose limit at that limit.
Well, that was what they came up with, which was quite embarrassing because their publication was designed to come out on the same day as the U.S. publication called Bear 1, BEAR 1. And Bear 1's conclusion was there was no safe dose, period. So the Brits are saying 140 millisieverts a year, and the U.S. is saying 0.
Yeah.
So that was kind of embarrassing. But so those are all the kind of things we explore in Earth as a Nuclear Planet. So it's sort of a general education for the underinformed or the curious, written in plain language with 500 endnotes, depending on how deep they want to dive in with source material. And
gotcha.
Here's an article on it, and here's the source paper on it. Which one do you want to read? So it's sort of like a portable library.
How'd you guys organize it? Did you tell like a story or just like a narrative?
Oh gosh, how did I organize it? Well, I don't write with an outline, and so it was really tough.
Send an email, Mark. I don't know.
Oh my God, it was tough because I didn't write with an outline, and then after I wrote it an outline, then I'm like, well, shit, this paragraph should be here, and this chapter should be over here. We did a bunch of shuffling around, but we start with Fukushima, and then we get into a brief explanation about isotopes and ions and all that stuff. So, and then we get into half-lives. The chapter's called The Half-Life Well-Lived. And so the heart of the book goes into the nonsense about how there's no safe dose of radiation. And it got so deep that I wrote a companion book that's sort of a deeper dive into this heart of the book. Yeah, so
that's how the LNT book came to be. You're like, this is
exactly the LNT.
Let's take it as an excerpt, and we'll make it on as a sequel or a next one.
Well, the chapter got so fat. I'm like, it got to be 20,000 words, and I'm like, this is a book in itself. And Tim is like, oh, we go ahead and write it. So I wrote it, and he helped me edit it, of course. But yeah, so it's Earth as a Nuclear Planet is a broad-based general education, and then the LNT report is a deep dive into what's the heart of the book, which is the idea is to destroy the false idea that there is no safe dose of radiation. It's just utterly, completely, and totally not freaking true. It's provable beyond a shadow of a doubt. And the guy, Muller, the guy that came up with the idea there's no safe dose of radiation, he never wrote and published an experiment by which others could check, replicate his idea.
Which I don't think the gravity of that is adequately represented or talked about in the world. And I mean, people will be able to read your book and read the report. We don't have to dive in the whole history here, but Muller, the guy that you reference, is essentially the father of this theory, linear no threshold theory.
Yeah.
That essentially the Nuclear Regulatory Commission has based all of their decision making on, right? The American regulator that's viewed as the gold standard globally and has forced there to be millions of pages of documents and rules and processes to guard against this danger of minuscule, tiny levels, no safe dose of radiation.
Exactly.
That prevented nuclear from being proliferated all over nuclear energy.
Exactly.
Globally, right? So
exactly.
Hey,
and that's what we need to kill. We need to kill
that this happens or that this happened. And it's, I don't know. I find it's a fascinating story. I can't wait to read your book, and I'll be sure.
Well, I'm really looking forward to it. I'll send you the Word doc on the LNT report. We're really close to being done. There's a half dozen things I highlighted I need to check on. Other than that, it's done. But it is the bottleneck.
Yeah.
And NASEM, the National Academy of Science, Engineering, and Medicine, just kicked the can down the road by coming up with this 300-page proposal that they go, oh, it's going to take a bunch of different agencies and it's going to cost $100 million a year for at least 10 years. The subtext is, if we can get the money, check back with us in a couple of decades. In the meantime, there's no safe dose. Therefore, it's almost impossible to build a reactor. It takes forever and it costs a fortune because you never can be too sure, you know?
Yeah.
We point out in
It's
romance.
facetious, but you're being serious, right? Like
I am being serious. It was in the NASEM report. I can't remember the name of it. It's like, let's everybody be scared for another 2 decades. The NASEM report basically comes out with like, well, we're going to have to engage. We're going to have to readdress this. But to do that, we got to do it with a bunch of different government agencies. And it'll cost at least $100 million a year and take at least a decade, maybe 2. And until then, we have to assume there's no safe dose. Therefore, wind and solar, we can't have reactors, and good luck keeping your lights on.
Yeah. So do you guys come out with a recommendation then at the end of the book, or do you just identify the problem?
We do?
Yeah.
Our recommendation is basically that we need to put this on the table for a discussion now. And also, we need to approach it with the idea that you have to prove there's no safe dose, as distinct from you have to prove that it's not dangerous. Contrary, someone has to prove that radiation is dangerous in low doses, which is below 100 millisieverts a year. That's considered low dose. They're assuming that it is dangerous and want to think assuming that until it's proven otherwise, which they call the precautionary principle.
Yeah.
Okay. And the precautionary
opportunity cost and loss.
Well, yeah, that the precautionary principle is the presumption of danger without proof. And what we're saying is, after 70 years, there's a plethora of proof that is not dangerous in the low dose range. And it is rather incumbent upon the naysayers to prove that it is dangerous rather than scientists to prove that it's not. What you're doing is you're putting the precautionary principle puts scientists in the position of proving a negative.
Yeah.
Oh, we have to invade Iraq because there's WMDs. Well, prove that they are. Prove that there isn't. Therefore, we better invade because you can't prove that there isn't. And after $3 trillion and 4,600 American lives, it's like, oh, well, I guess. Oh, yeah, they sold them the sun. And then China gets the oil. Yeah. That is a precautionary principle. It is the assumption, and it's not a principle at all. It's unprincipled, because it puts someone in a position of having to prove a negative. You can't prove that there's not Bigfoot. Look at this photo. See that fuzzy thing over there? That could be Bigfoot. And until you can prove it's not Bigfoot, we have to assume Bigfoot exists.
Yeah.
And so we turn it on the head saying, well, back at you, mofo. Prove that it does exist. And until then, why are you stopping us from building a clean energy source, which the Koreans are doing for $2,300 an installed kilowatt on time and on budget?
Which is one of the
cheaper than a coal plant.
Cheapest, reliable, deployable power systems in the world.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. By far.
Yep.
By far.
It's really it's kind of embarrassing as Americans that we can't do this.
And,
right?
And we gave the South Koreans that design. It was I think General Electric design in the 80s, and they fiddled with it, and good for them, And now they're cranking them out like sedans. And we're at Vogel building hand-tooled hypercars, And the Koreans and the Chinese are like, cha-chung, 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 there's another reactor, cha-chung, cha-chung, and they work, and they have them blown up and all the good stuff. And the Fukushima reactors, the only reason why they melted down is because the boneheads that built it put the backup generators in a basement on the beach in a tsunami. They coined the word tsunami.
They knew this was going to happen.
Yeah.
Right? Yeah.
Yeah. And what's really ironic about it is the closest reactors to the epicenter were Onagawa. You might have heard of Onagawa. It's a power plant in Japan that was closest to the tsunami. Their generators were on high ground. Nothing happened to those reactors. Fukushima's down the coast. They had their generators in a basement on the beach. And they melted down, and nuclear is dangerous. Between the two towns, there's a little place called Sendai. Have you ever heard of a Sendai stone?
No.
A Sendai stone was carved in the 1500s by old Japanese masters warning about tsunamis and do not build on the beach because of tsunamis.
Yeah.
That Sendai is between Onagawa and Fukushima.
Wow.
That's the kind of stuff we touch on in the book, is that the tragic irony of stuff like that. And the Japanese government even admitted it was because of their culture and insularity and stick-to-itiveness that nobody spoke up about the blatantly obvious bad design of not the reactors, but the site on which they built the reactors of Fukushima.
Yeah. But even still, I mean, nobody was harmed or killed from radiation. Like, no member of the public was hurt.
Nope.
So,
Nobody. The worst.
I side with the advocates that say that this is one of the best examples of why nuclear is safe. Like,
which is what we say in the book, is ironically the Fukushima was a testament to how safe nuclear power is. The worst dose, if no one had evacuated, the worst dose would have been 10 millisieverts. Was it 10 millisieverts? Yeah, which 10 to 30, something like that, which is equal to a CT scan.
Yeah.
So they evacuated 1,600 elderly people who died in the frigid March weather to avoid a CT scan.
Seems irrational. So I think the point that we're hitting on here, Mike, or that you're hitting on repeatedly, is like this net benefit to society point, right?
Yes.
And being able to call attention to it effectively through irony and through satire and through telling stories, it sounds like. But I mean,
exactly
is there perhaps another story or, I don't know, fact about the industry or something that comes to mind that is fun or funny to you that you find interesting? I don't know, it might be ridiculous or frustrating, but
sure.
I know that's
according to statistics, and this has been recorded for decades in America, about once a year, an American will be shot by their own dog. The dog will step on the trigger, generally. You know, the gun's in your purse and the dog steps on the purse and shoots you, right?
Yeah.
So in the last 70 years of nuclear power, there's been about 70 dog-involved shootings in America. In the entire history of American nuclear power, there's been 16 fatalities and 3 severe injuries. The 3 severe injuries were at fuel processing centers. 3 people died from an experimental reactor that melted down in 1961 at Idaho National Labs, and there have been 10 non-nuclear construction and inspection accidents. Okay, so in the entire history of American nuclear power, you actually factually, by statistics, have a better chance of being shot by your own dog than being harmed by nuclear power.
I've never heard that comparison. I will start using.
That's how we start the book.
Yeah, I will definitely start using it because that's incredible.
Yeah, it's just amazing.
Nobody talks about it.
Well, see, that's the humorous perspective I bring to it.
Isn't it? I mean, from my perspective, then, to be spending any more dollars to make it "quote unquote" safer feels irresponsible. I mean, some could go as far as criminal, right? That like we're wasting money and time and not utilizing this energy source that is.
It's fear mongering, and I'll give you an example about fear mongering. There's a woman on my street. And I live on a hill. She walks up the hill at night by herself wearing a mask. COVID killed a lot of people.
Not like a gas mask or like a gorilla mask.
No, I mean, and then 95. She got so flipped out and took it to such an extreme that to this day, and I watch her because I stay up late at night, have a cup of coffee, and And here's what's her name walking up the hill, and it's a steep hill.
Yeah.
With an N95 mask on,
Maybe
totally
she's trying to
alone.
trim the elevation. You're in LA near sea level. She's just trying to make it harder to breathe, and
It could be that. Yeah, it could be that. Yeah, right, exactly.
or she's scared, and society has fear mongered her into irrational behavior.
Yeah, and that's exactly what it is. And the fear that we get into the fear mongering, and Spencer Weird, you might have heard of him. He wrote the Rise of Nuclear Fear, great book, and he goes into how deep in the psyche that nuclear power can reach. I mean, here's the deal: you have a scientist that can actually change an element from one element to another. This is alchemy.
Yeah.
That flips people the hell out.
Yeah.
Because you are fiddling with the building blocks of the universe. But you know what? We got 8 to 10 billion people on this planet, and it's getting kind of toasty around here. We need to man up or girl up or whatever the hell you want to call it and learn how to use what we have sensibly instead of being afraid of the exact thing that can solve it. We have 4.5 billion tons of uranium in the ocean that can be passively harvested with synthetic sponges for only slightly more than what mined uranium costs. So we're suggesting that we have an American nuclear grid with reactors built in America, fueled without mining from the sea that surrounds us on 3 sides. And it is entirely, completely, totally, 100% practical, feasible, and doable starting today.
That answers the question of, are we going to run out of uranium, right?
Well, yeah, well, exactly, because that's one of the things is like, if we have a nuclear grid, where we're going to get all the uranium. Well, 2 answers. One, seawater uranium, which the advantage being that since it's fresh U-235 or 238 that you can spin up until 235 enrichment, you can use it for old school reactors.
Yep.
So you don't have to advance the generation 4, which is fast reactors, which is a fast neutron. The faster the neutron flies, the nastier stuff it could break apart. So all the stuff that you can't, that a light water reactor doesn't burn, you can throw it in a fast reactor and it will burn, but you need the fast reactor.
Yeah.
The seawater uranium, you can run any reactor that's ever been built with no mining. 0. None. And there's 4.5 billion tons of it. We did calculations, and if we used all of it, you could literally run the entire planet, all primary energy that we currently use, the entire freaking planet currently uses all forms of energy for 240,000 years.
That's
we figured they'll have fusion figured out by then.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
Mike, we've talked about a lot. We typically ask our guests kind of three final questions. So we'll dive into those. And I mean, you've talked a lot about steps we can take to build more nuclear, but I am curious about what your recommendation would be for the most impactful step we could take.
For the impactful what? I'm sorry, I have bad ears. I apologize.
And it's okay. What's the most impactful step that we could take to build more nuclear ASAP?
Aside from killing LNT and harvesting seawater uranium, what I think would work really good, honestly, hire the Koreans to come over here and build one of the reactors for $3,700 a kilowatt hour in 50 months with the idea that we'll watch them do it and learn from them.
Yeah.
Because here's the thing, there's all this thing about, it takes too long and it costs too much money. Well, let's get the Koreans over here to show us how to do it with a reactor that we designed. And then we watch them, and it's like, oh, God, I think we can do that. We built Liberty ships. We built 3,000 Liberty ships in World War II without computers, cell phones. We used slide rules. 2,600 of them were floating at the end of the war. There is absolutely no excuse whatsoever on God's green earth that we cannot build reactors for about what the Koreans are building them for and as fast as they're building them. And if we can't figure it out, we can literally, physically, actually hire them to do it for us. So Jacobson has a textbook. Talk about a textbook case of nuclear misinformation. He has a freaking textbook that explains how reactors take 19 years and cost like $8,000 to $12,000 a kilowatt. How did he figure that out? Because he looked at Vogel and he looked at Olkiluoto, or whatever you call it, that one in Finland that took forever and a day.
Yeah.
And that's his standard.
Wow.
That is a textbook, no pun intended, case of nuclear misinformation. So my answer, hire the Koreans and watch them. Because that reactor has been approved for build on U.S. soil. So it can literally actually be built tomorrow on U.S. soil.
I like that recommendation. I've got some people to email and talk about that with. So.
Every now and then I come up with a good idea.
I like it. How can people help? How can listeners help?
Buy my book.
Buy Mike's book. I agree. I'm buy a copy for some friends.
And the reason why is you need a general education. You need to get up to speed. Americans should be as generally familiar with reactors as they are with automobiles.
Yeah, I agree.
And if they're not, they need to get up to speed because it is the vehicle that is going to take us into the future.
Okay, so with that, what's your vision of what the future looks like in the next 10 to 20 years? Leave us on an optimistic note.
We get this L&T crapola cleaned up, that we start building reactors like sedans instead of hypercars. We take a cue from the South Koreans and the Chinese and just roll up our sleeves and get down to it and harvest the uranium we need out of the ocean to run the darn things, and also build a deep geologic repository in a place that's geologically sound. Yucca was built, the decision to build Yucca was a political decision, not a science decision. You need the right kind of rock to put it in, well below the water table, all that kind of stuff. When it's done, like the one in Finland, they just got finished building.
Oh yeah, the Finland's
it was built in the proper kind of rock. If the casks were to fail, it would take 500,000 years for that stuff to percolate up to the surface.
Yep.
Because it was built in the right kind of rock. So we need a deep geologic depository built in the right place. And we need to start building like the Koreans and the Chinese.
I like that.
We need sedans. We don't need McLarens. We need Corollas. Yeah.
Perfect.
I'm sorry if I'm getting too animated about this, but
you're passionate and you're engaged. I love it. So
that's a good way to put it.
Yeah.
I thought it was the coffee.
No, that's perfect.
Mike, really enjoyed talking with you.
I have too. This has been a great discussion. I can tell we're literally, when you release your book, and I mean, when you get super popular and we can never talk to you again, that's going to be tragic. But before then, we'll have to have you back on and
talk to my people. That'd be fun.
So
wait till that movie hits and pester me about it, because the deal should be going down. And if it does go down, I will get incredibly busy. But I told the producer and I told Eric, I got two things to write now instead of one. I got to work on this movie and I got to work on these books, but I got to do it. I mean, I got to do it because I got to do it. I'm down for the count for nuclear. It is my purpose in life to have the U.S. build a nuclear grid in my lifetime, and I'll be 70 next year. So get off the can and hire some Koreans. They know what they're doing.
I love it. Mike, thanks so much for the time.
You're welcome. We'll talk soon.